Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I know that it's the last day. We've all had a very full few days, and we had this beautiful moment for Allah outside that I think many of you were there for. So really glad that you could make it. My name is Dia Kayali, and I am going to be moderating, and I'm going to briefly introduce my speakers. And I just want to say, we have a whole hour and a half scheduled for this session. We're going to end on time, so we have 80 minutes. And we're going to talk a little bit about our work, but we also want to have time at the end to just let you think about this now. If there's an issue you're working on that has any content moderation dimension, and you want to talk about it in this room, we're really happy to talk through any specific campaign issues or anything like that. And I also am very happy at the end of the meeting. Anybody who wants to get involved in any of the things we're talking about, especially the Christchurch call, we really need people from this region to be in the Christchurch call. But if you want contact information for people at companies, I'm happy to give that to you afterwards. So this is meant to be a practical session. Really excited about these two speakers. They're people that I've worked with very closely. And unfortunately, our fourth speaker is not able to make it. She fell sick right before. So it's going to be us three. So let me start by introducing them, and then we're going to get into the first set of questions, and then hopefully an open discussion. As I mentioned, my name is Dia Kayali, formerly working with Mnemonic, aka Syrian Archive, Yemeni Archive, Sudanese Archive. Before that, I was with Witness, and before that, I was with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I've been working for about 10 years now on issues related to content moderation and how it impacts people in the real world, and how we can push companies who have so much control over our lives to make better decisions that are less harmful. Which might give you a hint of some of what I'm going to talk about is really harm reduction, right? Like, we know these platforms are terrible and we need better options, but what do we do in the meantime? So joining me in person, hopefully you already know her by now, Marianne Rahmeh from SMEX. We have been talking to Meta quite a bit. And how long have you been with SMEX? 2 years. 2 years. So really experienced in this space, in these discussions, and we've been in the same room. So excited to sort of reflect on some of what these discussions have looked like. And similarly, joining us online is Anjum Rahman from Inclusive Tiara Collective. We've worked together as part of the Christchurch call. And I'll let Anjum say what the Christchurch call is. She's also active with the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. She has a long history in community organizing, and now for many years has been in this space talking to companies and talking to governments, in particular around this issue of terrorist and violent extremist content. I should make quotation marks because we're going to talk about why that's a problematic term. But in these new and emerging multi-stakeholder spaces where it's governments, companies, and civil society all talking to each other. So really excited to have both of these speakers with me. Just, I guess, a disclaimer to add on to what I said about this being a lot about harm reduction. One of the reasons why it's so frustrating to have to think and care so much about what these companies do. But we are always thinking, myself and the people that I've organized with, about what are the things we can do immediately to reduce the harm. And how can we talk to companies when we know that our governments not only won't listen, but are oftentimes the source of the harm? I think something, especially in this region, that we think about. So with that, I'm just gonna jump into the kickoff questions, and I'm sort of like moderating and speaking, but what I'm gonna do is pass it to Marianne first, and then to Anjum, and then I'll share my answers. So we have some kickoff questions, and then hopefully we can talk about some specific campaigns. So first, I just want to ask, how do you engage with technology companies, and what issues have you focused on in that engagement? So maybe that's just the first question. How?
First of all, thank you for the introduction and for organizing. Thank you, Anjum, for joining us. We wish you were here. Um, well, to give you an answer, at SMEX, we actually, I mean, the unit that I work in engages daily with tech platforms on many issues. So, I mean, as a first point, which is not really my expertise, but we do have a safety help desk that was created in 2019, if I remember correctly. And so the help desk has actually these partnerships, between quotations, um, that are like trusted partners programs, either with Meta, with Twitter. Now I don't know what's going to happen, but
We'll talk about Twitter.
yes, with TikTok and other platforms, although Telegram is non-existent. And we do escalate cases from human rights defenders, other CSOs and organizations, and also just, you know, people who are victims of these policies that are put by these platforms, or just, you know, everything from bullying to sexual harassment to unjustified content takedown to hacking. They also do security assessments. They do security assessments, and basically what they do is they escalate these cases to the platforms, to this direct line with the platforms, in order to solve the case quickly. And so this is part of the, as you said, harm reduction that we do. A second branch, and that is mostly what I do at SMEX, is engaging with tech platforms on a daily basis, on specifically on their policies, be it policy assessments, consultations about their new policies, which we will talk about later, are useless. Maybe not that much, but
95% useless.
yes, yes. So what we do is we have, thankfully, we have all of these partners in the region and outside of the region, where we work together kind of as an informal group, I'm going to say. And we have these constant calls and constant communication with their policy teams, human rights teams, and so on, where we address our concerns on their policies. And we basically, what we do is we give them the context that they do not have, because, well, it's their headquarters that are in another, you know, part of the world. And so basically, as local experts, we provide them with comments and continuous feedback, and mostly negative feedback. Uh, and we hope that they listen to us, but I think we will talk about this later, right? Yes. So Anjum, I think.
Yeah, so Anjum, let me pass it over to you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, he uri tēnei nuingia, ko Kamar Shamim Rawa, ko Anisu Rahman, ko Kaumātua, ko Anjum Rahman, tuku ingoa. Hello everyone, I'm Anjum. I'm beaming in from New Zealand, where it's 1:30 a.m. in the morning, so excuse me if there are moments where I'm not entirely
Round of applause for Anjum.
Thank you. So in terms of how I engage in two forums, so first of all, the Christchurch Call, which is an initiative that was started by our Prime Minister of New Zealand and the French President. And the call is a series of commitments that tech platforms and governments have signed up to, and they have an arm that is made up of civil society organisations. So we call that the Advisory Network. And so as part of the Christchurch Core Advisory Network, I'm one of the initial co-chairs of it. Dia was also a co-chair. And so what we do within that network is we meet together as civil society organisations to build our own understanding of the issues that we want to advocate on, and then we meet with, in various forums, we meet with governments and tech platforms, reasonably senior management in tech platforms, to advocate on improving online safety, reducing harm, protecting human rights and free speech, all of those things. And so some of the issues that, for example, that we are concerned about in the Christchurch call is around algorithms, and particularly recommender algorithms and content moderation algorithms. And in terms of content moderation, we are particularly concerned about false positives. So where the algorithm is removing content that shouldn't have been removed. And we've seen examples of that, for example, at various times where Palestinian accounts have had their content removed when really there was nothing objectionable there to be removed. Also examples in India and other places around the world. But also, on the other hand, not removing content that they should. And we have seen, the impact of that. I know there's still an outstanding court case from the Rohingya against Facebook around, and Facebook themselves have admitted the part that they've played in exacerbating violence there. There are concerns about the exacerbating violence in Tigray and the Ethiopian conflict. So we know that what is happening online really does impact real world violence. And because of the volume, because of the virality, and also the fact that a lot of the platforms are really not good with dealing with non-English language moderation. We also are advocating on having these platforms and governments being more transparent and accountable in the way that they operate, making sure that they balance human rights so they don't forget about the right to life, the right to safety, the right to freedom from discrimination, the right to freedom of assembly, all of these things that are equally important to freedom of expression. And in terms of my own advocacy, you'll know that we suffered a terrorist attack in New Zealand where 51 people died in 2 mosques. And that was the basis for the Christchurch call, and Christchurch is the city where that attack happened. So really trying to put forward the impact on communities of what is happening online and what that ongoing impact. I'll very quickly cover off the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. So this is an organisation that was set up by major tech platforms. So I think it was Microsoft, Google, Facebook as it was then, and Twitter. And the main thing that they do is they have this hash sharing database so that when a live stream video that is of a mass murder that is shot by the terrorist and is propagating their reasoning for killing people, they wanted to make sure that none of that was appearing on their platforms. And so they use this hash sharing database to ensure that all the companies can take down content that has been flagged by any one of the companies, or we believe when requests are made by governments, they also will enter it into this database. So again, I'm part of the Independent Advisory Committee. So they set up this committee that's made up of civil society organisations, academics, and government representatives to give them advice. We don't actually have any power. We can't compel or require them to do things, but we do advocate particularly strongly. And I guess having the government members there means that those governments can regulate. So there is that power sitting there, and civil society really, it's only the public advocacy power that we have available to us, but we do use that and try and make sure, again, around issues of transparency, making sure that we understand how these systems work. They also have working groups that are doing research around various areas, again, in terms of legal aspects and various things. So, yeah, that's it in a nutshell. I better stop talking now around the spaces where I'm working internationally and around content moderation.
Great. Thank you so much, Anjum. And as I said, it's been my pleasure to work with both Marian and Anjum. I'll say a little bit about how I got into this work and the way that I do it. I started in 2014 around Facebook's then real name policy, where people were supposed to use the name that was on their ID on the platform. Funnily enough, Facebook denied vehemently that that was ever their policy because, as you may know, until recently, they didn't have any record of the changes that they made to their policies. Now, if you go into the Meta Transparency Center, it shows all the changes, it shows the recent changes, but that hasn't always been the case. And really, the kind of activism, the kind of work that we're talking about today is what led to all of the changes. Any positive thing that we say today about anything the platforms have done, they will never give us credit for it, but it is because of us. You may not know this, but transparency reporting on community standards takedowns, they never did that before. That was a direct result of people pushing and pushing, embarrassing them, talking to journalists, writing them letters, open letters, community forums, all of that. So we do get results sometimes. They're not, and that's, this is why so much, this is going to be the next question, is about what's the theory of change around this work. So I got into it around the Facebook real names policy. Some drag queens got kicked off. I'll tell it shortly because I know many people have heard this story from me before, but a bunch of drag queens got kicked off of Facebook. And as I like to say, don't piss off drag queens. They were using their drag names, but they're also names that they use all the time. So there was a very famous drag queen from San Francisco, well, famous there, called Sister Roma, who got kicked off, and she was able to raise a stink. There was an article in the Daily Dot, and then a bunch of other outlets picked it up. And then drag queens organized a protest in front of Facebook headquarters, and it got a lot of media attention. Some local government got involved, and eventually Facebook, this was one of the first times that Facebook actually met with people. Like, this is weird to think, right? 2014, this is 8 years ago, but it feels like it's a different world now. They didn't used to meet with activists. So it was one of the first times they actually met with anybody. They changed the wording of the policy. They made it so that when you, has anybody here ever been, if you are comfortable saying, ever been told that you were kicked off of Facebook for not using your real name? Was it recent? Okay. So did you have to submit ID? Yeah. So Anjum, the person in the audience said yes, they had to submit ID after getting kicked off. So one nice tiny thing we can take credit for is that when you send in that ID, instead of it just going through some general queue, they have a specific server where all of that verification goes. It's attached to a token stored in encrypted storage with an expiring token. 30 days. That's how long they keep it. That was not the case before. They were just like, we don't even know where the IDs were going or what was going on with them. And in the past, you had to only use government issued ID to verify your name. Now, and this is important for trans people, now you can do things like you can use a piece of mail. You can use a student ID. You can use a health insurance card. You have to have something that has a date of birth and something that has the name, but you can use multiple IDs. Yes, that's global. So so for anybody who gets kicked off of the platform for not using their real name, you can verify in many more ways now. What we wanted them to do was get rid of the real name policy altogether, and they didn't. A very interesting part of this campaign was that after the first year of campaigning, like it took almost a year to get them to make a bunch of changes, we tried to make the campaign global. So they were really interested in talking to drag queens and queer people who were in the United States. They didn't want to talk about the Dalit and Muslim women in India who were getting targeted for using their names. They didn't want to talk about activists in Vietnam. They didn't want to talk about activists in Syria who were getting tortured for their Facebook passwords, who are still getting tortured for their Facebook passwords. So even though we tried to make it global, it really, this is, I think, for me, an important lesson. It really brought to the front how much platforms are invested in satisfying the West. and how hard it is even when, and unfortunately, the reality is that was not common. It's not common for Western activists to go, oh, okay, we have privilege in this space, so let's make sure we're reaching out to the most vulnerable people to try to bring them in, because we don't want to just get our problems solved. So, you know, I think that's one of the key things in doing this work, is trying to get, like, and this is for me to do, this is my work, is to try to get international NGOs and US and EU based NGOs to understand that the problems that people face on platforms in Europe and the US, they're real, they're important, but they're not the only problems. And sometimes the solutions for one problem can hurt somebody else if you're not careful about the way they're designed. So, you know, this is really sort of a grounding for my work. So talking to platforms, doing direct advocacy to try to get them to change their policies has really been a lot of what I've done. I've also participated in these multi-stakeholder forums with Anjum, and sometimes also worked on legislation. We're not going to talk so much about legislation today because, you know, in our region, we're not going to get a lot of great legislation that's going to like help protect people's rights. And in fact, what we're usually doing, right, is fighting these horrible cybercrime laws and misinformation laws and all of this. So that's why these other tactics of multi-stakeholder forums and dealing directly with the companies are so important for people outside of the US and Europe, and why it's so, you know, frustrating when we're not included in the discussion. And so, yeah, that's basically how I've engaged. And in terms of tactics, well, actually, we're going to get into that. So let me stop there. I don't want to go into all the other campaigns I've worked on because there's so much that we need to hear. So I'm actually going to kind of combine these two questions. I realize it makes more sense. So about theory of change and about what's been successful and not successful. So yeah, I'll go to Marianne first. Do you have a theory of change for your work, both, I mean, as SMEX and also for you personally? And what do you feel has been successful? What hasn't been successful?
Well, first of all, thank you. You're always passionate. So just to go back to a point about legislation, I totally agree with what you said. It's also a third part of how we try to engage with tech companies, because as you all know, they are bound by legislation, and we are witnessing worldwide these legislations, especially EU legislations, that are forcing them to actually abide by and respect digital rights. And so we've actually been trying to work a little more on legislation at SMEX and on strategic litigation, especially. This is a plan for us to be working on soon. And since we have this kind of momentum of having some parliament members of parliament who are kind of responsive to us, we're kind of taking this opportunity to try to spread awareness and try to show the urgency and the need of pushing for new and better safeguards in Lebanon. I mean, in the region, it's a little harder, but and we're currently working on drafting a new just privacy law because we have, you know, a shitty law. Sorry. So to go back to the question, I think we see, and you guys all see every day, how much harm can be done on platforms and how much harm can be done online. And specifically, I mean, in the region, some posts that wouldn't be seen as harmful in another context are actually getting people killed, such as I think you've heard a lot from Libyans and Yemeni organizations. I think Iraqi organizations too, of just, it's just as simple as someone posting a picture of a woman on Facebook, and the woman would either be not wearing the veil or anything, and it would get them killed. And I think this harm, this potential harm, is what drives us at SMEX to do what we do. And kudos to all SMEX. And so I think this is how we see our theory of change, which is to try and push for platform accountability when, as you mentioned, when I know I'm very new to this space, but when you guys started working in this space, there were no platform accountability at all. And pushing for this is, I think, what we consider our theory of change. About successes, successful stories or anything.
If there are any, it's okay if there's.
Yeah. I'm gonna give. I'm not gonna be all negative. So to go back to our help desk, I know I'm talking about the help desk all the time, but it's I think since the beginning of 2022, we've received around 250 cases on the help desk, and we've escalated all of these cases, and for most of them, we were able to solve the problem or to at least contain the problem. And I think this is a little success story. And I know there are so many other organizations in the region and worldwide doing this escalation work and having helplines. I know Access Now has a helpline. I know all of the other organizations are either trusted partners with platforms or are trying to be in order to be able to escalate cases. And so I think this is great. And this is due to long years of activism and communications and constant advocacy work and campaign work. So yeah, I want to appreciate that. And second, I'm going to give a recent example because I was part of it, which is, as you know, in 2021, during the Sheikh Jarrah, period incidents. I'm not going to say incidents. Okay.
Wave. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I was very new to the space, and I witnessed all of these organizations just let's start a campaign, let's do this, let's work on this. And this group of organizations that I mentioned at the beginning, thank you for being part of this. It's so we started this campaign called Stop Silencing Palestine, and what basically happened was as you also mentioned, an enormous amount of press articles, bad publicity, many online campaigns, hashtags, etc. And it actually, I'm not going to say it worked 100%, but it got their attention at Meta and also at Twitter. And we were able to have meetings with them, many meetings with them, and to actually convey our solutions to this problem. And I think this big publicity stunt that we were able to be part of has incited the oversight board to take this case on. And I think a mini win for us was the independent audit that was done on Meta by BSR. It's Business for Human Rights. Business and social responsibility. Yeah. And so the report clearly says that Meta was censoring Palestinians. And I think this is it's a win for us. Yes, it wasn't perfect, but it's a win for us. And I think this is also what drives us, right? Yeah. And yeah, do you just want me to talk about successes, right? Success.
What hasn't been successful?
Oh, what hasn't been successful? How long do we have?
So 1 minute. But we have some other questions.
Yes. Okay, briefly. What hasn't been successful is platforms really do ignore us most of the time, and they have this thing that they call consultations with organizations and CSOs that they do, and they ask you about, yeah, we're going to start this new policy. What do you think? And you tell them it's really not going to work. It's not okay to do this. And we never get feedback from these consultations. We never know what happened. Did they take our feedback into consideration, and so on? I don't know if I have anything else to say, because if I start on my rant, it's never going to end.
Yeah, no, that's a good. Go ahead. And actually, before I pass it over to Anjum, I realized I didn't answer my own question fully before, so I just wanted to be clear. So so meeting with platforms, you can push them to make a meeting with you. Those meetings are very different from the meetings that they organize. So in terms of places where you can meet, you can engage with them. These multi-stakeholder forums that Anjum is talking about is one way, and that's a newer way. These didn't used to exist. There's the consultations that you've pushed for yourself. There's their official consultations. Meta has, for example, these product policy town halls. They also have trusted partners, which are people in the community that can report content to them, but they also go out and ask for your opinion on things. Twitter has a trust and safety council. I think they're probably going to get rid of it. TikTok also has a trust and safety council. It has not been as engaged. TikTok, like they're starting to talk to people, but I haven't heard anything about the Trust and Safety Council, and I know people who are on it, so I'm not really certain. Yeah, yeah. And has anything happened?
Not yet.
Yes, that would be great. I mean, actually, after we speak, I would love to pass it to you, and I'm really glad you're here. Fantastic. For Anjum, there's somebody from TikTok in the room. So we're gonna, yeah, thumbs up. That's fantastic. And honestly, like one of the things that's changed that's really important, companies representatives would never ever even 7 years ago, company representatives wouldn't have come to even RightsCon, which is a huge conference. And for them, we're seeing more and more and this is something that I've been saying to them now, I and many other people for many years, is like, come to regional conferences. You actually want to know what's going on? Come to us where we are and talk to us, because then you'll see the moment. You have to be willing to. It's very uncomfortable sometimes for company representatives. People want to yell at them. This is like part of the whole experience, I thank you for nodding. It's very nice of you. But yeah, like so yeah. So anyway, sorry to go in a little bit of circles, but I just wanted to clarify, like, these are some of the different spaces and opportunities for engagement, are these consultations and meetings. Okay, so let me pass it over to Anjum. Theory of change, what's been successful, what hasn't been successful, and however you define success.
Thanks, dear. Yeah, I don't know that I have any kind of formal theory of change or that we have anything written down, but some of the ways that we work and what we want to happen. One is that being present and being able to advocate inside the room, inside the tent, as it were, has benefits that are beyond not being in the room. And so we have that option, and we've thought about it at various times of, should we just walk away from this? Is it really multi-stakeholder? Are we having impact, or should we just stay away and advocate outside of the room? And I think all of us do believe that it is useful to be in the room, to have access to these government representatives and to the platform representatives, to be able to at least put our case and to advocate. And secondly, I think the biggest second part of our theory of change is that collective action with civil society organisations having, a common voice is better than each of us advocating alone. I won't say that we have a unified voice, because we don't. And a lot of the stuff that we do, particularly at the Christchurch Core Advisory Network, is try to come some sort of consensus on positions, because civil society, we all come from different parts of the world. We have different worldviews, different perspectives. There are and that lived experience. So if you haven't had to live with the harm, if you come from a demographic that is generally protected from the harms, then you have different human rights that you will emphasize to the ones where people have suffered directly from violence. So those are spaces of negotiation. And so basically that is the theory of change, that we have collective action and that we be there and be present and voice what we can and keep pushing. And I have to say, Dia is a great champion. The passion that you're seeing here today that she brings, that they bring to the forums is really wonderful. In terms of what has been successful, so from the beginning of my personal involvement with the Christchurch Call and then with GIFCT, one of the things that I have been really strong about is diversity. And that's something that I have worked on all of my life, is to have more diverse leadership in all spaces, better representation, and really pushing for challenging the assumptions people hold and the way that they do things, because particularly for tech platforms, the majority of them work in a very American paradigm, and it's a very Western white worldview. The way they organize, the way they operate, the way they develop their policies, what they preference and don't preference, all of those things. So I don't know that we've been entirely successful, but it's certainly high on the agenda to have the Christchurch Core Advisory Network be a lot more diverse than it is. So as with Dia, I'm going to do a membership push. We do need civil society organisations from Africa, from the Middle East, from South America, and from Asia to bring that more global voice into our advocacy, and for you to put forward what is happening on the ground for your communities so that we can advocate on those issues and push platforms and governments to think differently. The human rights impact assessment that GIFCT did, I think that was pretty much a win. And it was really good to have all these platforms and the various stakeholders that were engaged in this to be really openly talking about human rights and human rights impacts. In that space, what hasn't been successful and what I've found really problematic is the way that human rights is being used to exclude platforms and, maybe countries. And one of the points that I've always made strongly is that the 4 founding companies should have gone through all the requirements that they're putting on new members to show that they also are complying with the human rights that they want everyone else to comply with to be able to join. Because there seems to be this I'm going to be straight up front, this deluded notion that certain countries are upholders of human rights, and they hold this view knowing that these countries are colonizers, knowing that these countries are selling huge amounts of arms to both sides of conflicts, knowing that their foreign policy is killing millions of people, and yet placing themselves as the upholders of human rights and denying access to others is, for me, a real issue. What else has been successful? So I think in terms of GIFCT, I'm really liking that, they recently went to Africa and had a forum there, and they are actually pretty active in their outreach and in trying to connect to different parts of the world. So I feel like, yay, we're getting some progress there. The transparency reporting, Dia's talked about that, and those requirements. I think that is really good. And like the fact that they have these multi-stakeholder working groups, it's good that they have them. There are issues with those working groups as well, again, around transparency as to who gets on, how they get on. But secondly, the working groups have been producing research reports and so on, but getting that line of sight as to how has anything changed within the platforms and how has anything changed within governments through the work that these working groups are doing. We don't yet have a clear sense of that. And so we're pushing them to report more on outcomes than just the outputs of the reports, but what are the outcomes? What has changed because you've done this work? And I think for me, that's the most difficult part of this work, is it's really hard for me to know what difference I've made. It's hard to for me to say to you, I said this or I did that, and here's the outcome. It's never that linear. And it is very easy for them to ignore us. Absolutely. And as a civil society organisation member, as a co-chair of the Christchurch Core Advisory Network, I know how little power we have in the room. We have no coercive power whatsoever. All we have is our power of advocacy and our ability to connect with people. But nonetheless, I really want to thank all the people that have advocated to make sure that there was a civil society part of the Christchurch Core, and that have advocated to make sure that there is a civil society voice within GiveCT. How critical that is, and how much worse all of this work would have been if we hadn't been present there. I think what hasn't been successful is that the worst platforms are not engaging here. And so, hopefully Kiwi Farms has died a natural death. We know things like 4chan and 8chan, Telegram, and so on. Some the spaces where some of the really awful stuff is happening, they're not interested. Reddit is not there. So then what happens is that the awful stuff happens there, and then it kind of permeates into the bigger platforms. And it's really, we need to find a way to make sure that everyone is kind of in the tent. And if they aren't going to voluntarily come and join either GiveCT or Christchurch Core or whatever, then legislation and regulation becomes the only other option. So I'll stop there. I could also keep talking forever.
So yeah, I mean, I guess I'll say that in terms of theory of change, it has evolved for me over time. Harm reduction is still at the core of what I do. Also, diversity of tactics is very, very important, and it's important that we talk to each other. So what I mean by diversity of tactics is there should always be some people in the internet freedom, digital rights, human rights, whatever, however you want to call it. We've changed over the years, right? There should always be some people who are like, fuck the platforms, like I'm making an alternative federated social network. And then there should be some people who are like, I'm litigating. Some people who are like, I'm working on legislation and I'm focusing on European legislation that's going to have a global impact. That's one, I guess, advocacy avenue I didn't mention as much, but you talked about. For example, we had this Digital Services Act Human Rights Alliance that the entire point was to explain to European legislators the international impact that they were going to have. And then we need people who are on the independent advisory committee of GiveCT. We need people who meet with companies. We need people who say, I'm never going to meet with the company because I hate them and I'm just going to talk about how bad they are. All of those things are important, and the best thing is when we talk to each other. So harm reduction, diversity of tactics, and then this is very important, and this has always been part of my theory of change because I come from a on the ground, like grassroots organizing in the US perspective, where it's very easy for the person with the loudest voice to be the focus of the conversation. And I believe so strongly that we will not succeed without solidarity and without having as Anjum said, doesn't have to be a unified voice, but it has to be a collective voice. And where we have the small disagreements, if it's huge disagreements, maybe we can't have a collective voice. But where we have smaller disagreements, which does happen on the Christchurch call, there is not agreement about, for example, how much content we want platforms to remove. I feel very strongly about some content that is like targeting trans healthcare providers in the US, that it should be removed. Some other people don't. But we can still push for appropriate process. But at the end of the day, none of that matters if the most vulnerable people and the people who are actually being impacted by what's happening are not always the first point of reference. So you can't ask for a solution for the US that like is going to fix their problems if it's going to hurt the rest of the world. The rest of the world, using that phrase is very, even using it is like, So, you know, and this has not been the case for a long time. We have absolutely seen international NGOs talk about things and push for things in a way that's harmful, that discounts people's lived experience, is another phrase that I'm like, wow, why am I using it? Digital rights champions. You know, that's not based in reality. And so I often think of the analogy to the fight for gay marriage in the US. Like the cis gays, they got marriage and they were like, great, we won. This is great. We can get married. You know, that's great. What about all the trans women who are getting murdered in the street? Their problems are bigger than your problems. I'm sorry. Like, that's the reality. So you can, you know, fight for the thing that's easier to win, or you can say, we're going to center actually the more difficult things, you know, like, sorry, but you have to do that. So, so that's also part of my theory of change, is like, it has to be the hardest problems to solve, the most vulnerable people have to be the first point of reference. And this has definitely been the case with it's been a fight that Anjum and I have had to have in the Christchurch call and in GIF CT, where it's like, okay, you know, I understand that you're really concerned about free expression, and I'm also really concerned about free expression, but I'm also concerned about content that is literally leading to people being murdered in the streets. Like, you can care about both things, and you have to have a way to look at it and sort of balance, you know. So yeah, in terms of what has been successful and what hasn't been successful, I'm just going to be blunt. The most successful thing, frankly, is embarrassing the hell out of a company until they have to talk to you. I'm sorry, but that's been my experience over and over again. I'm not sorry. I mean, that's why my name is campaign and all the stuff with Facebook real names policy. That's the only reason it happened, because like, yeah, like I said, like, don't piss off drag queens. You're not going to have good optics. It's just not going to work out well for you. Right? Yeah, like, what were they thinking? What were they thinking? Like, yeah, they should have known better. Especially, I mean, it's a Bay Area based company. They really should have known better. Bay Area, for those who don't know, people say that Stonewall was the beginning of things, but actually it was the Compton cafeteria riot. Happy to talk to you about it afterwards. So yeah, what has been successful is getting media attention. Frankly, number one most successful thing. I would say alongside the media attention is getting really direct critique from the United Nations. So the other person who was going to be here, Victoire, was going to be our fourth speaker. And I'm sure Victoire would have talked about, Victoire's worked in Myanmar for a long time, and the UN directly critiqued Facebook for its role in the genocide of the Rohingya. And I think that frankly led to, like, most of the changes we've seen, like the oversight board. I actually think the oversight board was a direct result of the UN critiquing Facebook's role in that. So yeah, attention, just global attention, international attention, especially attention from US-based media outlets, and like, you can strategically use that to get them to pay attention to global majority issues. That has been successful. I think that also protests, like physical protests, have been successful. Those are harder to do. This is one of the reasons why I've actually tried. I'm probably moving back to the Bay Area, and I really am interested in being a conduit for more physical protests in front of office. Like, there should be protests, and there were actually protests for Save Sheikh Jarrah, for censorship of Palestinian content in front of headquarters in the Bay Area. But yeah, so optics, I think, has just been probably the number one thing. I do think that some of these policy consultations, not the ones that they organize, but the ones that we push for, they didn't used to be successful, but in some senses they have. And then just, this is frustrating, but continuous, sustained, consistent pressure has been successful. That's how we got transparency reporting on community standards, which didn't used to exist. That's how we got, I think, a lot of the changes that Facebook has made. I'm really, and I only have one question after this, so we can start into more of an open discussion. And I'm just going to say, I am deeply disturbed about Twitter. Like, all of the progress that we made, it's over. Twitter is over. Like, if you're on Twitter, I'm like, delete your account now. I'm just, this is me, just like, I'm not speaking for the other speakers, but I deleted my account the day after Elon Musk took over. It's not a safe place, and your data is not safe. The engineers they fired so many people that two-factor authentication stopped working. And this is really frustrating for everybody involved with the Christchurch call and GIFCT. Twitter has been a huge part of those discussions, and in fact announced a research project. And actually, I think it's an example of success, but now who knows what will happen. They announced a project where they were going to create these big data sets to look into the automated processes and recommender algorithms. I don't like using that phrase because it's very unclear, but they were going to create data sets along with the government of New Zealand, the United States, and Microsoft to allow researchers to actually understand video recommendation systems and content recommendation systems. And it's just not going to happen now, and it's a big blow because you know, for a long time, this is another thing that I think has been successful, and we're not going to be able to do it as much anymore, although TikTok, you're probably going to become part of this, is pitting companies against each other, right? It was really obvious. I don't remember who did the first community standards enforcement report. Was it YouTube did it first, and then Facebook, and then Instagram? No, Instagram was definitely not first. After, yeah. So YouTube, then Instagram, and so it became the norm. Now it's the norm. You report on community standards enforcement. That was not the norm before. And so there is absolutely a sort of contagion effect, and that can be positive. But now with Twitter, I'm worried that it's going to be negative because they have set an example for how to engage and how to, you know, all these different things. So I am very nervous about that, and we'll see. Okay. I think let's move to the last question, and then we can have more of an open discussion if anybody has questions or thoughts. So just the last question is, what one piece of advice, or you can make it two if you need, do you wish you had gotten when you started doing this work? I said you can make it two because I have two. But let me pass it first to Marianne.
I just want to add to what you said about making that the community standards became like a standard. Hopefully, they will soon become it will soon become a standard to have them in all languages. In good translation, really.
Well, you mean the Google Translate version of the community standards that Facebook put up for Burmese wasn't acceptable when it actually literally said the opposite thing of what it was intended to say? Oh, yes. Oh my God, yeah. Fantastic. What room is your session at 4:30? Okay, great.
Advertisement minute. There's a session on translating community standards. Please join at 4:30. Yeah, or like not having them in Kurdish as an example. Yes.
They're not in
Kurdish.
The community standards are not in Kurdish. It's really...
Yeah. Piece of advice. I think you already talked about this a lot, but they will only work if you make them work. So big press stunts, you talked about this. Another piece of advice would be to keep the communication going and keep as much as possible, keep your contacts with anyone who works at these platforms, because it will allow you into the structure inside the organization, and then you would know which department is responsible for what, and which unit or department can actually make a change. Because we have seen human rights departments that can do nothing really. So keep the contacts, keep the conversation going with platforms, even though sometimes you feel like it's useless. Keep just keep it going, because it's going to be useful. The contacts are useful. Talk to them. I know we've been pretty much negative, but there are some people who actually want to help, and these are the assets that you need to keep within any tech company. So I think that's my 2 cents.
Anjum, what's one or two pieces of advice you wish you'd gotten?
I think one The first one is building your alliances and support networks. So finding your allies is really important. And I think even within the Christchurch Core Network, and given that there were so many disparities of views, just having those allies and people that you could bounce ideas off, talk to about how we can advocate better and how we can push for different points of view to be heard and to even create the space for those was really important. And the second one is, yes, it's around that patience, or what I would call persistence maybe, is to keep pushing. I think it's really easy to get disheartened because you don't see the quick wins, you don't see the direct results. And, many times that I question myself as to, should I really be here and spending my time on this? It doesn't feel like I'm getting anywhere. Just not giving into that and really staying in there for the long haul and building those relationships, keeping pushing is critically important. So those would be my two.
So one piece of advice that I wish I'd gotten when I started doing this work is tech companies are not doing you a favor by meeting with you. You're doing a favor for them. You are giving them free market insight that they would pay, millions of dollars for. So you should behave as if you're doing them a favor. And that comes to my second piece of advice, which is never sign an NDA. So yeah, that has actually changed. In the past, companies would very much make out like they were doing a favor, and it's not so much anymore. But with regards to the NDA, be aware that we've for years have seen companies make activists and people from impacted communities and people from global majority countries sign NDAs, whereas huge organizations like Electronic Frontier Foundation, Access Now, a lot of these big organizations, they might have maybe like an agreement for their help desk, but other than that, they don't have to sign NDAs. So if you're asked to sign an NDA, don't just take it, question it. Maybe there's some small specific circumstances, like for example, if a company was ever willing to give me access to the training data that they use to train their algorithms, I would gladly sign an NDA because I can understand why, right? But just to have a conversation with them, I'm not going to do it. And I have not been required to sign an NDA for many, many years, including a meeting that I attended actually with Rafiq, where he's technically not supposed to say he was at the meeting. I was the only person at the meeting who didn't sign it because I was just like, I'm not going to do this. And like, it's not that everybody else with me was not savvy. They were very, very savvy. I think really they did let me get away with it because they were like, we can't just deny Dia to come to the meeting now. So, sometimes you just need to be a pain in the ass. Maybe that's the third piece of advice. Okay, Anjum, do we have you back?
Yeah,
okay,
I hope so. You can hear. Okay, so what I had been saying, thinking that you were hearing me, is the first piece of advice that I had was really around building your alliances and your support network, and how important it is to find your allies, to discuss with them and talk to them about how you can push and create space to have these different points of view heard. And we've had to do that even within the Christchurch Core Advisory Network, because there are prevailing worldviews, there are more dominant parts of the world, and even living as a minority in a Western country, we're really a Pacific country. That's a space that I'm used to, not being heard or not having the space to be heard. So having allies and having your support networks is critically important. And my second piece of advice would be around being really patient and persistent, because it's almost impossible to see the direct, immediate results of your work. And it's almost impossible to see what change you're making and when. So therefore, you really just got to stick it out and be in there and keep pushing, because you don't know what's landing where, but I'm sure that some stuff is landing and it is being heard. So yeah, those are the two things that I would say.
sorry, I'm just gonna add one thing, one last piece of advice that I've learned from working with you all. It's work together, share knowledge, share capacity, share resources, and also, to quote our wonderful moderator, uh, make them commit to co-design. Thank you.
Make them commit to co-design. Yeah. And now I'm going to say also one last piece of advice, which is to actually, I wanted to, excuse me, I wanted to add this to what you were saying about and also for Anjum, push them for specific deadlines. Like, don't ever leave a meeting without having a next step and a deadline. And that includes a meeting where they've asked you to come give insight into a policy. Don't leave that meeting without them having told you, okay, we'll come back to you in 2 months and let you know how we integrated it. Because if you don't, that's where the extraction happens. And this region has had enough extraction by the West. We don't need it in policy discussions as well. So, okay, so we have a good 20 minutes for discussion. If we wrap up early, we wrap up early, but very happy to hear any questions. And one thing specifically that we talked about is if there's stuff that you're interested in or you're working on and you're like trying to brainstorm a campaign, really happy to think through that. And before I pass it over to the audience, I also want to just make the pitch again. Anjum and I are both still part of the advisory network. Anjum is one of the you will be again one of the co-chairs, and we really want to expand who's part of that discussion. So if your organization might be interested, we also do take sometimes individual members. I've rejoined as an individual member myself. So if you're interested, please come talk to us. And there's different like levels of involvement because we know that people are really busy and they have other things they're working on. But we also want you to have the opportunity to be a part of that space. So, okay, so any audience, any questions, any campaigns you want to discuss?
Thanks so much to all of you. It's been really interesting. I am not really from a content moderation background. I'm coming more from like a campaigning background, specifically on SRHR, sexual and reproductive health and rights. And we see a lot of issues with content moderation on that topic. But for me, what I am experiencing is that there is a call for more protection, so more moderation, but at the same time, less taking down of ads that are about reproductive health. And so how do you, and I know you were mentioning that, so how do you deal with that sort of like conflicting messages when you talk with the companies? Thanks.
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. I definitely have a response, but before I go, Anjum, do you want to jump in? Because you probably have thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, so we do push for both. So we do push for online safety, but we're also really pushing them for stuff that is taken down that shouldn't be taken down. And I can assure you that in the multi-stakeholder forums that we have, that civil society is pushing back really hard around making sure that they're having those considered decisions. And I think that's where a lot of our members have concerns around automated decisions where there's no human intervention, because that's when it's more likely that they'll take down stuff that they really shouldn't be taking down. And that's where the transparency around those false positives is really important. So rest assured that we certainly do push for free speech issues just as much, and for dissent to government actions and all of those things, because in the government space, we're seeing a lot of government interference from around the world in those decisions, and things being taken down, activists being deplatformed at the request of governments. That is hugely concerning. So I understand what you're saying, and we're very clear about some of those issues as well.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is that all of these discussions are strategic, and you will have platforms tell you exactly what you just said. They'll say, well, okay, you're pushing us to do this, but this group is pushing us to do that. Because they want us to think it's a zero-sum game, But the fact is, we're not asking for more or less moderation. We're asking for better moderation, and we're asking for the resources to be used in a better way. And so, I mean, around reproductive health, I think there's definitely, because it's a U.S. like it's an issue for the U.S. I think there's an opportunity there, you know, to use that actually as an example of it's not a zero-sum game. It's about being clear about your policies. It's about having enough content moderators. It's about using less, and I think this is essential. Every one of us have mentioned this. It's about using less automation, because when they're using machine learning and when they're using other forms of automation, they're going to make mistakes. It's about co-design of your automation with civil society. I am going to keep pushing for this until I'm blue in the face, and I believe it will happen. I honestly believe that in 4 or 5 years, we're going to be in a position where there will be civil society groups, if these companies are still around, because some of them won't be, Twitter, where civil society will be sitting down with engineers hopefully from TikTok and from Meta, you know, from Instagram and from Facebook, and brainstorming lists of slurs that should be used to train their natural language processing. Brainstorming, you know, the civil society group brings in 10 pieces of content that show this is a post that is actually trying to share information about sexual and reproductive health. This is a way that people are being targeted. You know, so here's the difference. We'll help you understand because you're not going to understand on your own. And so I think that we often get pushed into this, and I've been very, very passionate about this because I think that we've been pushed into believing that free expression has to be in tension with every other human right. And that's just not, that's an easy way out, you know? And we've seen it with Twitter, right? We've seen like Elon Musk is like, I'm a free speech absolutist. And so that's all I care about. And I'm not going to do anything else. And yeah, he's like a free speech absolutist for anybody who's not upsetting him. So yeah, I just think, yeah, go ahead, Anjum, and then I'll pass it to.
Yeah, I think also that's where having that diversity within the content moderation team is so critical, because the bad actors are getting so much more sophisticated at using coded language. So, for example, within the Indian context, they might use the word cauliflower farmer, which is actually a reference to mass murder. That is, if you don't know, it's not going to be picked up by an automated system, right? Because the two words themselves are not offensive in any way. And so unless you understand the context of a particular mass murder event where the bodies were buried and then cauliflower plants were planted over them, it's not going to make sense to you. So really important that within the content moderation teams that you have that diversity of experience and that cultural knowledge for all these different parts of the world and the way that people are using coded language to understand why something is a threat and why something needs to be removed, whereas something else that absolutely isn't needs to be really protected.
This is Gohari. I work for IFEX. I wanted to ask about advocacy towards, for the sake of less automation. I noticed during the last few days discussions about data sets, but I wonder if there were advocacy towards how algorithms are designed in the first place to analyze mistakes, to analyze the impact, because especially non-tech folks in positions of impacting policy, they don't have technical background, and they always talk about just data sets, even though it's important. But I am an ex-tech person, and I know how designing algorithms, just the design, also needs some space if it doesn't already.
Yeah, there has been. There's unfortunately, we've seen a lot of splintering in the machine learning and an AI space. So there's multiple versions of sort of principles for human understandable algorithms. There's the, I can't even remember all of them. There's the fairness and transparency in machine learning principles. There's the human understandable project, which I think is at MIT, or I don't know. So there are a few areas where people are pushing for that. I also strongly suspect that the new organization, it was founded by Timnit Gebru, with also with Alex Hanna, DARE. It's a new, just this year. And for folks who don't know, Timnit Gebru was the person at Google who got pushed out of their ethical AI team after trying to publish a research paper that showed how current data sets for natural language processing are really leading to discriminatory outcomes. So she was pushed out, and then the rest of the team basically left or was pushed out, and then she started an organization, and some of those folks went over there. So I think they'll probably be doing work around that as well. So yeah, there has been some advocacy, I think, in terms of what's realistic for people in the civil society space. I am very excited about this tool that Josa just presented on. Yeah, so this fantastic tool. Yeah, why don't you talk about it? I've been talking a long
Oh, I don't really know much.
time.
I was just gonna remind you to talk about it, but
okay.
you know.
So
Yeah, the principle.
yeah, so Josa is going to be publishing these 2 guides on AI. They just did a presentation on it this morning, and they are so helpful for advocates. One is an advocacy guide, and the other is actually just a how to talk about AI for non-technical people. And this is actually a real issue that I've had, because I've been in these discussions for long enough that I know how to say some of the things that companies say. And I know some of what they mean by some of the terms, but we do use these terms that don't really make sense sometimes, and we have to be clear about what we mean. So like the term recommender algorithm doesn't, like, there's not actually such a thing as a recommender algorithm. There's many different processes working together. So yeah, even when we say machine learning, that's not always accurate for all of the processes that are being used. It's not all machine learning. There's different forms of AI and other types of automation. Hash matching technology is not AI. But it is automation. So yeah, I think it's really good to have a good basic technical background, and you don't have to not background to have the language to speak about it, and you don't have to have a technical background to do that. Like, I am not a computer scientist, an engineer whatsoever. Like, I can write crappy HTML. That's it. But I feel that I'm able to talk to these platforms in a way that is really consistent with their understanding of what they're doing. Yeah, but great question.
Can I make a couple of points here?
Yeah.
So first point is, what we always say, that code isn't neutral. And we know, that like that this notion that it's just code and it doesn't have human biases. But of course, the design, of algorithms and automated systems reflect the biases of the people that are designing them. And so again, I'm going to, this is my main theme. This is why you need diversity in the room when you're starting with the design and those kinds of things. And we keep pushing for that. And the second point I'll make, and one thing that we are talking about a lot in the network, and I've written a sort of paper because I'm an accountant by background and have done financial audits, is the whole area of algorithmic audits. And the importance of that. And so the paper that I wrote was around what could be learned from the structure of financial audits to put up a similar structure for algorithmic audits, because I think that scrutiny, and to do it in a way that protects IP, that protects user privacy, is critically important, because that will then impact and influence any new algorithms that are designed, if they know that it's going to be audited, and not the code that's audited, but the impact of the algorithm that is audited.
First of all, thank you very much for the interesting discussion. Initially, you mentioned the Western centrism, or sometimes US centrism of the platforms. And as you're now, like, as TikTok is becoming more prominent and you're engaging more with TikTok, is there a difference in how to engage with the TikTok, which is like Chinese owned as opposed to the US owned companies, both when it comes to, let's say, attitudes and also, but also processes.
This time, let me go first to Anjum if you have any responses, and then I'll pass it to Marianne, and then no, okay.
So I'll just say that TikTok isn't yet a member of the GIFCT, and they aren't a member of the Christchurch Core Advisory Network. So we haven't been in the room, like I haven't been in the room with them within those multi-stakeholder forums. So difficult for me to answer that question. Sorry.
Yeah, Anjum, our membership, I don't know where to speak. Our our membership is under study. So we recently, from Tech Against Terrorism, we went from mentorship to membership. And our membership, we submitted, like, I remember Erin reached out to us with like a few clarifications. We sent them back her way, and we're waiting for a response. And Christchurch call as well, but I'm not the one handling it. So yeah, so soon, hopefully, we will be. I don't know where to look. So soon, yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah.
I can see you. It's fine.
So for GIFCT, yeah, but for the other, what else did I want to mention? I completely forgot, but no. Oh, we're also part of the working groups, but I guess everyone else with this one, and they're really fascinating. I haven't seen you in one, but I think I'm in the transparency one. So yeah, I really enjoy those. Just for that, yeah.
Could you mention actually what you wanted to say about the Trust and Safety Council?
Yeah, yes. So here there's like two things I wanted to mention. There's the trust and safety. There's our is that better? Okay. There's our let me just take off my mask since I'm away from everyone. Sorry, when I'm in Lebanon, I would live with a sick parent, so I have to take my precautions. So there's two things. There's the community partner channel, and then there's a safety advisory council. Yes, that's the one. So I got confused. I'm like, which one are you guys referring to? The community partner channel is like the trusted flagger program, where if you are part of the channel, you can escalate content to us and we will immediately, like, depending on what the content, or you can say, take it down or bring it back up, we will look into it. The Safety Advisory Council, and I'm very proud of this, for the MENA region, we launched the first Safety Advisory Council dedicated for the MENA region and Turkey, all with experts from the region. There's 6 experts right now. There is, from Turkey, Dr. Akin Unver. I think you might know him. He's an expert in violent extremism. He's a researcher. He's amazing. I absolutely love speaking to him. He's looking into also, he looks like, for example, okay, I won't talk. I'll send you his website later. I realized I was, yeah. So there's Dr. Akin from Turkey. From Lebanon, there's Akram Karami. He works on online safety. I think you guys would know him. From UAE, there's Dr. Hamad Al-Niyadi. He also works on minor safety and online safety, and also linking between education and the online world. From Palestine, there's Ohaila Shomar from Sawa. They launched the first hotline for women and children to help them with domestic violence and all that. There's 2 more members. From Egypt, there's Dr. Naila Hamdi. Absolutely love that woman. And from Morocco, there's Miriam Bahri, who is running an NGO that was the first NGO that works on suicide among youth. So these 6 members, it was launched in early 2022, and we want to, of course, expand and move forward with them. We've met with them 4 times this year. I'm the one who handles the relationship with them. I'm the one who brings topics to them and everything. And it's been an absolute, like you were saying, and it's also like that, it's an absolute honor for us to work with them, just like when we sit with you guys, just like when we sit with others, when we work with them and we sit with them, because you're sharing knowledge that we otherwise, sorry, yeah.
We're almost at the
Oh,
end, so
sorry.
we have like 1 minute left. But thank you. That was really helpful. So that is different in the sense that it's individuals and it's not people representing organizations. So I think that's part of the reason why I haven't heard about it as much, probably. But I will say, yeah. So just to answer your question in terms of what my experience has been, it's that TikTok has made a great effort to separate itself from those its roots, even though, like, I think we still have, and many of us still have, like, valid concerns about that. So the people that we're engaging with are, like, I've engaged with employees who are in an office in Austin, you know. So it's still the same kind of employees. And I think that it's just been really clear to those of us who've been in this space for a long time. And of course, that I would say over the last 2 years, TikTok has just, they're like new, they're newer. So they've just been kind of figuring it out, like, how do we talk to people? And I think there's still probably a lot of, there's like not that we trust people at other platforms, but that like we know them. So those relationships don't exist yet, where it's like, people in civil society, everybody knows who to talk to and what the relationship is. That being said, I think that and it is the last thing I'll say because then we have to wrap up. I think that there's going to be really interesting discussions in the GiveCT and in Christchurch calls, because there's many more companies that are based outside of the US, and there's a specific effort to recruit membership from outside the US and Western Europe. So that's going to be very interesting. Okay, I know we're out of time. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you again to Anjum.
Thank you.
And just to really put it in perspective, I'm on a call with Anjum in 5 hours. So she's like gonna take a nap, and then we're gonna get on a call together. So thanks, everybody. And if you, please, if you want my contact information, anything, come on up.